Hey guys, welcome back to the Curly Reader. My name's Amanda, and today I want to share with you all of the books that I read during the month of June. So this month, let me grab my handy dandy little journal. I read 11 books this month. I am so happy with that number. I feel like that is a good number for me. I was feeling really stressed out at the beginning of the month. I had a lot of assigned reading. I had committed myself to a lot of things, and I was just feeling overwhelmed, and I ended up having to DNF a buddy read, which I hated doing, but that alleviated a lot of pressure that I was feeling at the time, and I was able to get through these 11 books. I had a couple of just like random pickups, and then a lot of stuff that I had planned on reading. So of those 11 books, I had one 2-star read, one 3-star read, two 4-star reads, and the rest were 5-star reads. So that's 7, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 5-star reads in 1 month. Who even am I? I don't even know. I think I probably have had, actually, let me check. How many 5-star reads have I had this month total? Let me find the right page in my journal. Ratings. Okay, so up until June, I had 9 5-star reads for the entire, January through May. And just in June, I had 7 5-star reads. So it was a great month as far as quality of what I was reading. I loved what I read this month. So yeah, I'm excited. Anyway, and then of those 11 books, sorry, I keep looking down. I'm looking at my journal, my stats. Of all of those 11 books, only 3 were library books. So 8 of them, I keep having to do math in my head, 8 of them I owned. Which was fantastic. I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 physical reads and 6 audiobooks, which is fair for me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 middle grade, 1 young adult, 5 adult, 2 graphic novels. That's how, my stats. And so that to me was it was just such a perfect, it ended up being a perfect reading month for me. A very even keel across the board as far as stats go. So let me really quick grab over here the one DNF that I had. I ended up DNFing my buddy read of Leviathan Wakes. This was just we started this right at the beginning of the month, and right at the beginning of the month was when everything hit the fan. I live outside of Minneapolis, and things were just, my mental state was not great. And I was having a really hard time concentrating on the intricacy of this sci-fi. This is something that I will probably pick up sometime in the future. It may not be this year, but I would like to still try it. I got, I don't know, not even halfway through it. I probably got a third of the way through it before I finally just had to call it quits, because it was just stressing me out. Like I said, it was just the intricacy of all of it. So that was the one DNF I had. The one 2-star read I had was another buddy read. And that is Little Bee by Chris Cleave. This is one that I buddy read with Danny at Spinelli Speaks, and this was a cover buy. I said this month that I wanted to try to read cover buys, and I'm trying to find how many of these I actually read were actually cover buys. None besides this one. So, whatever. You win some, you lose some. It was still a great reading month, so I'm not going to complain. But this was a cover buy for me and Danny both. So we both had thrifted this book, bought it just based off the cover. The back of this book says, "We don't want to tell you what happens in this book. It is a truly special story, and we don't want to spoil it. Nevertheless, you need to know enough to buy it, so we will just say this. This is the story of 2 women. Their lives collide one fateful day, and one of them has to make a terrible choice, the kind of choice we hope you never have to face. 2 years later, they meet again. The story starts there. Once you've read it, you'll want to tell your friends about it. When you do, please don't tell them what happens. The magic is in how it unfolds." let's just say I was not expecting what I got with this book. This whole, like, when you read it, don't tell your friends what happens, I think is a load of crap. Like, I don't like to talk like that, but this book, like, there's no reason why you can't say what this book is about. It doesn't ruin anything. This book is about an immigrant that is fleeing her, like, war-torn country from Nigeria to the UK. Her town, her village was ravaged by oil people, I don't know, drill people who wanted the oil. Like, her village was on top of oil. They basically came in, they killed the entire village. She and her sister flee. She ends up making it to the UK, is held in a detention center. And all you know is she has this one driver's license with this one guy's name and address on it. And you're getting dual perspective. You're getting her perspective, and then the guy's wife, you're getting her perspective as well. The chapters are very long. This whole book is 11 chapters. So it's alternating chapters, and just the length of the I don't like books with long chapters anyway. That's just a personal preference. But I don't think knowing that about this book would ruin anything, and it would prepare you for what is in store. Because you can imagine the horrors that this poor child went through. I think she's 16 in the book. And so you can just imagine what she went through. And knowing that mentally ahead of time would have prepared me to maybe not pick this up when I did. It was graphic. It was kind of, I don't know. It was very unbelievable in parts. So there were just certain things that characters did that were completely unbelievable to me. Never in a million years would have actually happened this way. And so I don't know. 2-star read. I did not care for it. And part of that was because I was surprised by what I went into. And part of it was just I didn't like the writing, and I didn't like the way that the characters, I don't know why my children are banging around again, why the characters were doing what they were doing. It just didn't make sense. So that was my 2-star read. My 1 3-star read for the month was Stamped: Racism, Anti-Racism in You by Jason Reynolds. This is the YA remix version of the Ibram X. Kendi's Stamped from the Beginning that's like this big. That everybody's reading right now, and I just went ahead and listened to the audiobook of Stamped because Jason Reynolds narrates it, and I love Jason Reynolds' narrations. I've read multiple books by him and listened to them. I love it. Highly recommend A Long Way Down. If you have not read that, listen to it. It is so phenomenal, and there's a graphic novel coming out of that apparently, and I'm so excited because that is so good. However, I finished this book late last night, and I'm still processing my thoughts about it. I try to go into books like this with a very open mind because I know I'm a white woman. I come from a place of privilege. I try to check that at the door, especially when I go into books like this. And I try to just go into it open-minded, learn what I can from it. My issue with this book is that I went into it thinking that it was going to be like a history like you haven't heard before. So it's the history of racism from its conception in Europe and Africa, and then when it comes over to the United States, and when the Europeans were colonizing over here, and just kind of how it's developed. And it's not a history book, but it goes through a lot of history. There's a lot of history in this. And I think the history aspect of it was amazing. There were a lot of things discussed in here that I had never really heard of before. Some of it I had, some of it I hadn't. My biggest issue with this book is that it was so heavily slanted. There was a lot of things not taken into consideration when talking about certain white people's actions, specifically presidents and things like that. There was a lot of inference as to how the presidents and the people of power were feeling and what their fears were, and they did this because they were afraid of this. And I think maybe I need to go back and read Ibram X. Kendi's book of this, because I know he is a very well-researched writer. He knows his stuff, and I don't. Like, I have not done the research. I just didn't like the way that things were implied in this, to where every single thing any white person mentioned in the book was wrong. And it was wrong, and nothing anybody did was right. And so this was just, like I said, it was very hard for me to swallow, and it may just take some more processing for me to actually like get it all. And so this was just kind of my gut reaction, my initial rating of the book was 3-star, because I really, really like what it said. I just wish it would have been more objective. And I know that's really hard to do. Maybe that's not fair for me to say. I get that. We're moving on now. We're moving on. All right. So then moving on to my 2 4-star reads. I had 2, the first of which was Picking Cotton by Jennifer Thompson Canino and Ronald Cotton. This is one that I featured in my Dad Recommends video that I did for Father's Day. And this is a story about Ronald Cotton. He was accused of raping Jennifer back in the 80s, and she picked him out of a lineup and ID'd him and said that, yep, that's the guy that did it, and he was sent to prison on a life sentence. And then years later, when DNA evidence was this was right when the O.J. Simpson trial was happening, and DNA evidence was a brand new thing. They took the DNA and realized that he was in fact innocent and had never done it. And afterwards, they meet. Ronald and Jennifer set up a time to meet, and they end up becoming friends through the whole thing. And so it's kind of the story. You get both of their perspectives, her perspective of the night that it happened, his perspective, of the night, and what he was doing then, and his time in prison, and all of that. And they together have done a lot towards eyewitness testimonies and all of that, and picking people out of lineups, and how that is dealt with in the justice system, especially in North Carolina, which is where this took place. This was a great read. There were certain parts of it that I thought it could have gone there a little bit more, and that's why I gave it 4 stars. It wasn't quite as compelling as some other nonfiction books that I have read, but it was still fantastic. Also, I forgot to mention, I did Book Buddy-a-thon in June, and this is the book that I chose to pick for a book about friendship, because Ronald and Jennifer are now great friends. And they have that bond, which I think is just amazing, that they were able to kind of overcome that mistrust and become friends through this process. And so this was great, 4-star read. My other 4-star read that I read for a book club is Evidence of Thee by Sheila O'Connor. I went to see Sheila O'Connor speak at the Twin Cities Book Festival in October. She is the author of my favorite middle grade book, Until Tomorrow, Mr. Marsworth. And so I wanted to go and see her speak, and she was speaking about her new book, The Evidence of Thee. And it's called A Novel in Fragments, Facts, and Fiction. This is the story of Sheila's maternal grandmother. So she found out when she was, I don't even know how old she was, probably 25, something like that, that her maternal, who she thought her grandmother was actually her aunt. And her grandmother had been sent to basically a juvenile detention center for girls. It was called a school, but it was not a school. Back in the 30s in Minneapolis. And she was sentenced for, I don't remember what her sentence was. That's going to bother me. But basically for getting pregnant. So she was sentenced because she got pregnant. And her baby was born at this school. And it was just kind of the school's documents were then sealed for 100 years. Her mom found out what had happened later in life and had to go through a lengthy court process to get the documents unsealed so that her mom, who was born, this was her birth information, could see what was going on. And she went with her mom to kind of look through all the documents. There was very, very little there. on what actually happened. And so she took these documents and she took a bunch of research that she did about Sauk Center, which is the place that her mom was born. And she took those documents and then she wrote a fictional story surrounding all of that. So in this book, you get pieces of the documents that were in her file. You get pieces of, you know, research that she found through other resources. And then you get the fictionalized tale of V, who was her actual maternal grandmother. It was super interesting. It's told in just a very interesting, they're very, very like short chapters, sections, whatever. It's told in a very interesting style, almost like a mixed media type of thing. Very interesting. And there was a lot in here that wasn't spelled out for you. A lot was implied. A lot was just kind of left up for you to decide for yourself. Very interesting read. So if you have heard of this, if you have read this, I would love to talk with you about it because it made for great discussion for book club as well. All right, now we're moving on to my 5-star reads. So let's see, where should we start? I'm going to very quickly mention too that I'm actually going to be just mentioning briefly here, and then there will be a follow-up video to this. So throughout the summer, I decided with my older 2 girls. So I have a daughter who just finished 4th grade and a daughter who just finished 3rd grade. And I decided that I was going to assign them reading 1 book per month for the summer, just to kind of get them out of the rhythm. They've been reading a lot of Big Nate and the Warrior Cats series by Aaron Hunter still. And so I wanted to kind of get them reading something that was going to make them think about the world a little bit more. And so the younger one had not yet read Wonder by R.J. Palacio, so I assigned her this, and I told the girls that I would read the books with them, alongside them, so that we could talk about it as they read it. So my 9-year-old read Wonder by R.J. Palacio, and then my 10-year-old read The Lions of Little Rock by Kristen Levine. I gave both of these books 5 stars. However, I'm going to wait and do my reviews of them with my kids. I'm going to have them sit down with me and do reviews so that you can hear their thoughts about them as well. However, because of the way that YouTube is now, if I had them in this video, comments would be turned off, and I want you guys to be able to comment on this video. I want to hear what you have to say. So I will do a separate video with them reviewing these 2 books, but I gave them both 5 stars. And yeah, look forward to that coming up this month sometime. All right. And then I also read, oh, you know what? I have another book on here that I did not write on my list. Let's see, where is it? I did not write this on my list, and I actually read this. It's Anne of Ingleside. I'm going to talk about this really quick. So Anne of Ingleside is the 6th book in the Anne of Green Gables series. So all my stats that I talked about were off. This is the 6th book in the Anne of Green Gables series. It kind of follows her once she is an older mother. All of her kids, I think she is just getting ready to have her last baby. I think she has 5 kids. Honestly, I don't know. This book was very confusing to me. I enjoyed aspects of it, but I have a hard time deciphering between the kids and who's who and their ages and how many kids there are and that sort of thing. That's probably because I'm listening to the audiobooks for these. Yeah, so through this one, we get the perspective of each of the different kids and little stories about each of them getting into trouble and their thoughts about things, but I cannot for the life of you tell you, or the life of me tell you how many kids she has or how old their kids are throughout the book. And then as the book goes, you're going over so many years, and the kids are getting older, but you're switching perspectives between it's very confusing. But I still enjoyed it. I enjoyed kind of hearing about the kids and the shenanigans they were getting into. A couple of things that I didn't love about this book is it kind of brought to light to me how much back then, and I'm sure this was culturally what they did back then, they didn't really tell the kids what was going on ever. And these kids were scared out of their mind a lot of the time. There's at one point Anne gets sick and they send all the kids away, and all these kids think their mom's gonna die. And the kids of the families they're staying with are telling them, like, oh yeah, your mom's gonna die. And it's just horrible. They're scared to death, and so they do things to put themselves in danger because they're scared for their mom. I didn't love that. There was also a lot of talk about just physical appearance and how that affects beauty and that sort of thing, which I wasn't a huge fan of, but I also understand it was probably a product of its time. The one thing I did like in this is there's a part in this book where Anne just kind of melts down a little bit and is just like, why am I doing this? Nobody appreciates me. I'm not happy anymore. Like, she just kind of disconnects and just like retreats into herself, and then she snaps back out of it. And I think that's so typical for moms to feel like that. I know as a mom I have felt like that before, where it's like, nobody's seeing what I'm doing, so why am I bothering doing it? Nobody is appreciating me, so what's the point? Does my husband still love me? He doesn't act like it. He's so exhausted every day. He comes home and he just goes to bed, and like, I don't know what's happening, you know, where am I in my life, sort of thing. And I enjoyed that part of the story, but that part of the story was like, in the very, very end, like, so this was probably a 3-star for me. I'm still enjoying going through the Anne of Green Gables series. It's just getting harder to keep track of the years as they're going by and the characters, because they're constantly changing and that sort of thing. So there is a 3-star thrown in there for you. All right. The other like read along that I'm doing, taking part in, is my reread of Harry Potter. And this month I read Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. I loved this book. Like, I do not remember loving this book as much as I did when I read it the first time around, but this book was so good. And then I watched the movie, and the movie is total crap. Like, so bad. The whole time I was watching the movie, I was pretty much sitting there just ranting to my husband about how horrible it was and how they kept leaving things out and changing things that they didn't need to be changing, and it makes no sense the way that they have it in the movie. And but the book is so good. It's just so action-packed, and there's so much in it. There's so much character development in this one. I always thought that Prisoner of Azkaban was my favorite, and I don't know why I thought that. I just think like some arbitrary thought in my head. I thought Prisoner of Azkaban was my favorite. I've only ever read them once, so I don't know why I thought that. Hands down, this has been my favorite of all the ones that I've read so far. So we have 2 more to go, but this one so far is my favorite. Loved it. 5 stars, hands down. I love that book. All right. Next, I forgot to mention. So this I read as Krista's favorite color on the cover for Book Buddy-a-thon. So the challenges for Book Buddy-a-thon, really quick, was to read a book about friendship, which I did, to read a book that had Krista's favorite color on the cover, which I did, to have to buddy read a book, to read a 5-star read of hers, so read a book that she had rated 5 stars, and then to have her pick a book out for me. So, and those are all coming up right now. So the first is the buddy read that we did together, and we buddy read A Gentleman in Moscow. We did this in preparation for the chat online stream that Katie from A Life Between Words did with Amor Tolls. She had that scheduled for June, and so we both knew that we wanted to read this so that we could help support her, and we were both very hesitant going into it because we knew it was going to be a character-driven story, and neither one of us are huge on character-driven stories. And so we were like, okay, well, we'll do it together. We'll see how we feel about it. And we both loved it so much. This book, you guys, the writing is so beautiful, and the Count is so, he's amazing. This is a story about Count Alexander Rostov, and he is sentenced in 1922, I think is when it starts. Check really quick. 1922. He is sentenced to basically house arrest at the Metropole Hotel in Moscow. And if he steps outside of the hotel again, he will be arrested and sentenced to death. And this is because he is part of the elite in Russia. This was right after the revolution. And so the Bolsheviks are like, nope, all of the elite got to go. And his sentence basically was to live at this hotel, and you follow him throughout his life at the hotel up through, I think, the 50s is the last section, is like 1950 something or another. I'm checking now. I think it's 54, but I don't remember now. Oh well, it's not important. So like in the 1950s. So you're following him. When we start, he's like 33, something like that, years old. So throughout his life, and the friends he meets at the hotel, and the bonds that he makes, and how he, the ups and downs of his emotional state. And it's so good, you guys. And the live stream that Katie did was so great. I loved getting to hear Amor talk about this, and just, it was so good. Read this book if you haven't already. I will say, because of his writing style, Amor has a very eloquent writing style, and he uses words that I have never, used in my life, that I could probably figure out what they mean, but, off the top of my head, if you said, hey, what does this word mean? I would have no idea. So there were points where it was kind of hard, not hard, but it just took a longer time to read, but it was so beautiful and it was so worth it. And 5 stars, highly recommend. All right. And then another one that I read is the one that Krista picked out for me. And I don't have it because the same day that I finished it, or the day after, I gave it to my neighbor to read, because that's the type of person that I am. And so she has it right now. But it is Everything Else in the Universe by Tracy Holzer. And I basically had sent Krista a picture of a bunch of cover buys that I had purchased, and had her pick one out, and she had never heard of any of them either. So she just randomly picked one. And you guys, this book was so good. This book is about, I don't even remember what her name is now. Lucy, I think, is her name. And she lives in California with her huge Italian family, and her dad is a doctor. He had just finished med school, and then he was basically called up for medical draft for the Vietnam War. This is set during the Vietnam War. So he has to go to Vietnam. He comes home missing an arm, and so he can't be a surgeon anymore. And it is about her coming to terms with that. It's about her watching her dad go through the process of grieving over his arm and his lost future. And throughout this process, she meets a friend, and they get to know each other. He has a history, with the war and stuff. There's a lot of dialogue about the Vietnam War and about how the climate in the United States was surrounding the Vietnam War. We get kind of stuff about the other veterans. Can't speak. The other veterans and World War II veterans, and how they were responding to the Vietnam War vets. And it was not pretty, guys. It was so sad reading this book. But it was so good. Highly, highly recommend this book. I so badly want more people to read this because I want to talk about it with all the people. It was such a great book about perseverance and grief and veterans, and how important they are, and how just because somebody sacrifices differently than you do doesn't mean it's less valuable. So good. Go read this book. Hands down 5 stars. Maybe one of my favorite middle grades of the year. It was just that good. All right. Trying to go down my list and make sure I'm not missing any more. Okay. Yeah, that's it. So then we get into my 2 graphic novels that I read this month. So first I got from the library, They Called Us Enemy by George Takei. This is one that had, during the time that the Newbery Award comes out, they come out with all these different awards, and this one, I don't remember which award it won, but it won an award. That's when it was put on my radar. And so I knew I wanted to read it because it has to do with the Japanese internment camps during World War II. And I've kind of been looking for some historical fiction about that, and I've been continuously being let down. I've read a graphic novel, I've read just a middle grade book. I wasn't finding anything that was like satisfying that thirst for that knowledge until I found this. This was so well done. Now, going into this, I knew it was going to be political because George Takei is a very big activist. Like, I knew that going into it. However, it was so tastefully done. This is the story of it's a memoir, it's a graphic memoir of George Takei's life. He was a child during the time of the Japanese internment camps, and his family was put in a camp for like 3 or 4 years. They lived in an internment camp, and it's the story of that and his parents' perspective. He continued to have dialogue with his dad through his later years in life about the decisions he made, about why things happened the way they did. And the thing that I loved about this book is towards the end, when you're kind of wrapping things up and you're getting to, like, let's pack a punch sort of time, he talks about how his dad always said, like, we still have the best government in the world because we are a people's democracy and people have the power to change the country through what they do. And it was so good. This is the type of political like agenda in books that I like, when it's uplifting and it's not like victimizing people. Like, he never once was like, our family is owed by the government, our family is owed anything. He never played the victim. He was just, we can make the world a better place. And it was so good. You guys, this book, sorry, I'm not an eloquent speaker in the least bit. The graphics were, it's black and white. It was great. This did it for me as far as Japanese internment camp, like, history. It's a nonfiction. It's shelved in the middle grade section. I think I listed it as YA because I would probably say, I don't know if I would give this to my 10-year-old. I mean, there's nothing in it that's like bad. It's just interest-wise. So good. Highly recommend. Sorry I'm not an eloquent speaker, but I love that book. And then the last book that I rated 5 stars is another graphic novel, and this is the book that I read that was one of Krista's 5-star reads. Krista read and I was like, oh, well, I'll just read that in graphic novel and count it because it's still the book, even though it's like a different version of the book. I don't know. I read Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This was adapted by Damian Duffy and John Jenkins. I don't know. It's like tabbed over. John Jennings. And this is the graphic adaptation of Kindred. Oh, this book, you guys, was so good. It is very graphic. Oops, sorry. I just knocked my tripod. It is very graphic. It was hard to read, but it was so compelling. I couldn't put it down. It was so well done. Like, I don't know if I would have been able to stomach reading the novel because of the graphic scenes. Like, I can just imagine how they were described, and it just like turns my stomach even thinking about it. Like, seeing it like gave me a physical reaction, and so I'm sure like reading all the descriptive words would just make it that much more intense for me. This was so good. This is about a woman. What is her name? Oh my goodness. Oh, Dana. So this is about a woman, Dana. She's a black woman. She lives in the 1970s, and just one day randomly she is transported back to pre-Civil War era Maryland. So on a plantation, and she gets there and this little boy is drowning, and so she grabs him out of the water and puts him up on shore and gives him CPR and saves his life. And it's a little white boy, and she then, through a series of events, is transported back and forth between 1970s to this other time. And it's always when this boy needs her help and she's continuously having to save his life. but then she gets stuck there for times, and she's having to acclimate to being in a slave area, being a Black woman, and dealing with what and all that entails, and then going back. And it was just so good. Octavia E. Butler is an author that I've been wanting to read for a while. I just haven't ever gotten around to it. I don't know why. I definitely want to pick up more of her stuff. I know Parable of the Sower has also been adapted to graphic novel, and so I actually have that on hold at the library now. I'm going to be reading that next because this was so good. And I know I should pick up the novels, but I'm kind of wary to now because I don't know how intense they're going to be, and it kind of scares me a little bit. But this was, it was so good. And the graphics, I mean, they weren't probably my favorite type of illustrations, but it worked for the story. The only thing I will say is sometimes with the illustrations is the characters looked very angry when I don't think they were intended to be. But other than that, I loved this book. So that was another 5 stars. So those are all the books that I read this month. So 12 books, lots of 5-star reads, lots of great learning books. I had a great reading month, guys. So if you've read any of these, as always, I love hearing your opinions about them and what you've been reading lately and all of that. Love to interface with you down below or chat with you, whatever you want to say, down below. And yeah, other than that, I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you stick around and subscribe. And until next time, see ya!